a farmer's market, which is very, very popular and looks like it's going to continue. Other than that, they're sort of abandoned buildings, and the buildings are not part of our project, although some of the students make some reference, or might make some reference.
This is the Borealis neighborhood, the Rio Grande, and our proximity to that is a large floodplain sloping gently towards the Rio mountain range in the distance that many students are referencing. And I think that is good enough to sort of get your bearings on the site. So we are now live streaming on YouTube. Control L, and then you can go through your presentation. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Yu Shen. I'm a third year MLA student, and this is my first LAR studio. And being the first person today, I'm going to briefly cover the site and the project. So as you see that we're trying to transform the underutilized rail yard in Albuquerque into an urban project with a new soccer stadium, may bring in 15,000 people. And Albuquerque, it has dry desert climate with an elevation of 5,000 and with a multicultural setting with indigenous, Mexican origins, and immigrants. The city has a flat topography. The site is close to Rio Grande, and it has a low flood risk, despite a couple areas having 1% annual chance of flood hazard. And the site sits at old rail yards, which was active from late 18th till mid 19,000 centuries. Not 19,000, sorry. But between the neighborhood barriers that keeps a lot of the city's old memories and South Broadway. The Cole Avenue right north is an overpass, and the important physical connection of the site is to the transit center and downtown on north. A couple of improvements has been proposed for rail yard areas now, including the existing rail yard market being the main attraction today. So it's super active on Saturday forenoons with foods, with drinks, stalls, and crowds. When we were there, I was thinking that it would be better if the yard age was not fenced and wrapped by parking on 2nd Street. So if there are more green canopies, less surface parking, it would be better. On the days the market is closed, it's just burning asphalt and the closed roads and streets occupied by cars. You can see from the adjacent use analysis here that there are schools, daycare centers, and churches around. However, we learned from Rob and the community workers that it's hard for the neighborhood to keep young people with the old houses and poor streetscape. So I began my programming with the intention to transform the place into an urban hub, able to hold events and gatherings citywide on days with games and events, and to serve the daily leisure life of neighborhood live here. In a word, to eliminate the impression of the site being an obstruction. So the stadium has occupied huge space, but general people cannot really use it for daily recreation. Plus, Albuquerque people have passion for different sports. So began with adding open sports facilities. I have youth soccer and other courts and playgrounds for the community. On the left, you can see that I'm trying to generate the circulation beginning with the running and biking loop here, and linking with other portions of the site and the promenade to the edge of the site, stretching to the neighborhoods. The outside the stadium are a series of open spaces, different types of commercials supporting daily use, and people come for games, grocery stores selling goods harvested from the urban farm, and reduced surface parking and parking structures, and apartment. And the main drainage goes from north to south, absorbed by linear buffer which also provides shades. So the master plan, this is the master plan of the ribbon. I call it this way because the shape of the running and biking loop. You can visualize a lot more green cover, and surface parking has their own bioretention, and see the higher story buildings of the stadium and the hotel with darker shadow. What's new from the previous programming is that I got rid of the single houses at this corner because of possible property rates, make it into a more open community space. There are 2 points I want to highlight. The first one is that when you come out from the south entrance of the stadium, there are City Plaza, which is more paved, and the event line to satisfy different types of event. And I've seen stalls in Real Yard Market area and was proposing pop-up food trucks on game day. So I thought that why not transforming the wide promenade into linear freight car market? Both connect spaces and provide food for drinks and place to rest. So let's take a closer look to the City Plaza and the linear freight car market. The sittings are on the 4 sides of the center plaza, and they serve as small gathering spaces separately and together hold more people at different angles as a whole. For bigger events, I imagine there will be like dancing or game day performances in the center as a stage. The freight cars follow the rail tracks preserved as heritage celebrates industrial background of the site. Trying to show the texture of the pavement here, the center is pervious concrete with coarse pattern, and the promenade outside the stadium is bi-colored concrete with patterns inspired by the local artful pots. From this perspective, I'm trying to highlight the reuse of the freight car here. If you don't mind, I zoom in a little bit. Like turning these freight cars into little shops, and the tables with canopies are surrounded. And this curtain steel shading structure above giving sense of industrial and the pervious promenade paving underneath. This burnt orange brownish color of these materials express my impression to Albuquerque's local materials. So here's a section cut from existing market here to the south entrance of the stadium. You can see that the freight cars shops are much lower compared to the 70 to 80 feet high stadium. And the 5 stories commercial building on the west, which is on the background here, the bottom 2 floors will be retail and venue. The upper 3 will be the hotel. And there are like the sloped lawn with the benches. Another area highlights my theme was the agriculture and sports park on the southeast of the site. The sports field, the play areas, and the youth soccer field are here with the back room and changing room accessed directly from the bridge connecting the west half. And the greenhouse is here with the outdoor planning and the orchard rows surrounding. To provide offering chance for community engagement and provide stuff to be used and sold in the kitchen and in the grocery store, the whole goods grocers. And the position of existing mostly concrete fenced retention pond we mentioned about is now a bioretention surrounded by plants collecting excessive irrigation along the swale from the farming. So this is my consideration of plants. Taking the City Plaza as example, the category is established in terms of the different textures. You can see that there are general leafy or floral landscape species for joy of green and foliage. And there are dry desert spiky species identifying the feature for the local plants. And the species for the buffer and retention that are able to deal with the storm water. So this is my project. Thanks for hearing.
Okay. Why don't you go to your master plan and let our reviewers
Sure.
ask their questions or make their comments.
This is Rob. I liked your verbal presentation. It was clear and walked us through the different spaces and hit the highlights in a way I thought was effective. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think also when you zoom into the smaller scale, a lot of your nodes have a nice sense of space and human scale, which some other folks have struggled a little bit with. So I think you have an innate sense of what the spatial quality that makes it comfortable for humans. And that's a very good thing to understand. I think there's a little feeling of the site being disjointed. For me, across the tracks, we have the little sort of bridges in a couple of places. But other than that, the flow between the two, it seems very separated by the railroad tracks. And I think a little bit when you zoom in, like on the next page where we zoomed into the city plaza area, there's a lot of great ideas, and I do really appreciate that the scale feels right. The spaces between elements and the sizes of the different programmatic areas feels good, but the form feels a little disjointed too, like just another, one or two more layers of refinement of how these different spaces adjoin one another or flow. It feels like it's almost there, but it could use a little bit more study and just another couple of layers of trace.
Got it. Yes, I definitely think that this is the part I need to make more efforts at, because I can see, I think it's better since last time we have a midterm review, but still, like something are straight, something are like curvy. So yes, I may do a lot more tracing paper practice in the future.
But overall, I feel like if I was in that space, it would feel very comfortable, and that's a hard thing to get right. So I commend you on that.
Thank you so much. This is like how I began to think about my design, is like starting from the moments that I want people to feel, like the perspectives, the zoom in thing, and then like jumped out and do the plan. And I guess that's why some kind of like forms are not consistent.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was gonna say that you can go back to the master plan.
This one?
Yeah, I like we're bringing in different types of sports, for the community. People kind of perceive arena, for that kind of ganging those up. That seems like a logical thing to do. The entry experience on the north side from that parking, I felt could have been included. There could have been maybe a promenade from that through the gaming yard market, so that people sort of are engaged with that before they can, go up to the soccer field instead of just parking and go directly to the soccer field. I'm sure that parking lot serves more than just the soccer as well, but and then I appreciated the homage to the rail lines, bringing in the historic rail line routes and creating a market. I think that makes a lot of sense for a destination, and it's pretty clever.
Got it. Thank you.
On
And to build on that a little bit, I think you hit a very important point of the sequence of arrival. So like theme parks and zoos do this very well about creating a sense of anticipation as you approach something, creating a really strong sense of entrance through some sort of gateway or portal, and then a real strong sense of arrival. And there's a psychological experience that you're bringing visitors through to something like a stadium that could really build excitement. So I'm not sure who the reviewer was, but I think that was a great point there's a lost opportunity in that sequence.
This is Reed, and just a few points. One is that I've mentioned in the during the morning session is the question about the size of the stadium and the amount of parking. It seems to me that number 9, your surface parking lot, would be much better allocated to a parking structure of some kind, because the amount of cars and people related to the stadium are going to be a lot higher than you would be able to get into number 7, the parking garage on the corner. A parking garage that size is not going to be terribly efficient. And the number 7 site, the parking garage area, would really make a nice entrance plaza or something that connects the neighborhood with the stadium. Another issue is that I think, unfortunately, your graphics, they're kind of a combination between a diagram and realistic. And I don't think they serve you very well. They don't give a much sense of detail. It's really kind of an elaborated diagram, which is okay, but it would be nice to see more detail. And I think that the graphics don't lend themselves to that very well, unfortunately. I think they kind of cheat you a little bit. Let's see what else. The items on the east side seem fine. I think those are good. The youth center is good. And again, I'm not sure that the available parking for the whole good grocers is going to be adequate. So there's some disconnects here between what you're showing and the amount of parking and land use devoted to those items. In terms of the amphitheater, or the city plaza rather, I kind of wish there was more shade or more trees, that you could have developed that more. And so that's another thought. I like the idea of the freight car market a lot. I think that's terrific. And that would be really great. Again, be nice to have more shade, more trees. So maybe that's enough for now.
This is like where I have questions in general. So I wanted to like make an open and paved space here, but I don't know, like, because I think if there are plantings, it may bother like a continuous movement if there's like promenade or dancing performance, for instance. So do you have any suggestions in terms of this?
You're going to have to repeat the question. It's a little fuzzy here.
Oh, sorry. So like you talked about the need of more shading in this area, especially in the center of the plaza. But I was trying to create an open and paved space here to support some like large movement, like the promenade or the dancing performance, for instance. So this is how I have trouble adding shading structure or trees in this like continuous open space. If you have any suggestions in terms of this.
How big is that space? What are the dimensions, do you think?
So it's about 150 feet this from north to south, and this way will be 300.
Yeah, so it's about the size of a football field, approximately, or a soccer field in very rough terms. I think there's lots of possibilities for creating more shade in there. There are a lot of great spaces that have trees on a regular basis where they're up above the surface, meaning you see through the trunks. Not that they need to be dense, but that's one possibility. And then also creating perhaps some clusters of trees that would provide shades in some areas and still give views through other areas. So I think you could develop that a lot more than you have.
Cool, got it. This is really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Claire Edelman. Heath, thanks so much for the presentation. You know, I want to echo what others have said. I think the freight car market, the scale seems appropriate. I think it'd be a wonderful place for the neighbors to enjoy. If you wouldn't mind going back to your overall plan, I'd like to speak to a few things on it. The one thing that strikes me about it is that I think, you've provided a lot of wonderful resources for the community, but in many cases, for some of the further away people, they would need to walk across or pass quite a bit of parking to get to them. And I could see a good case for thinking a bit about the order in which things go, especially adding more trail connections for the neighborhood, increasing the walkability across the site. And then the same with the trail connections. Some of the loops seem a bit forced for if they're really meant for hike and bike. So I think, taking another pass at if you can make that trail a bit separated from the architecture, if you were to move forward, how you could make it its own experience, and include multiple loops that on an active stadium day, you could still come out and enjoy it and not necessarily interfere with that, all of that crowd and things of that nature. I also just want to comment on some of the thoughts about shade. I think in general, there's some real opportunities there, especially, that sense of processing. If your sense of arrival as you come to these parking areas and then you're meant to go to these other amenities, is there a way to make that, increase the shade for those walking those distances and having walking trails? I think Christy Tenite's Desert Botanical Garden is a wonderful precedent to look at. You all probably looked at that a bit, of how she moved people through and also got separated large vehicles from those coming in their individual cars. So I think that would be a good one for you to study when you're thinking about this scale of activity and parking. Thank you for the work.
Okay,
Do we have more time?
any last
We
minute?
do. We still have about 8 minutes if.
Okay, yeah. I'll try not to repeat comments, but I think you came a long way from last time from the midterm, so commend you on that. And ditching the single family or the residential that you have, because I think was a good move. I agree that the east side is feeling pretty good, except for some, some parking stuff that we talked about already. I really like everyone, I think as a professional, when I hear the freight car idea, I think that's so exciting. And it already gets me thinking about so many ways to design the details of the whole freight car market experience. That's pretty fun. One thing that I think we could do that would make this even better, that experience better, is on the east side, you're giving a lot of neighborhood give back, right? But on the west side, it's like everything's turned inside.
Yeah.
So, and maybe it's just not shown, but like the retail on the bottom of the hotel could also activate the street. And then having those portals in, like we have, those portals to draw people into the core, I think is good. That's something to think about. And then I agree with shade. It's just number 2 feels like that's where you go to die. It's so hot. And so but there's solutions here. Like I think you showed me before, their existing rail market, don't they have like a landscape that exists?
Yes.
Just north of it? Is
do
it
you want-
shown there?
Yeah, and I'm sorry. Do you want me to?
Yeah, okay, right there.
Zoom?
I was just curious if you could, it looks like you're already tying to that. I was wondering where you have the event on now, if number 2 couldn't just become lawn with those clusters of trees, with those moments of respite, and then maybe bring some of that existing rail market language into number 4. Like that's a detail, but I think that would be a way to solve. And I think, yeah, more trees, the better. I think when I was talking to you about the Austin FC Stadium, the same problem. We wanted to provide so much shade in the plazas that they kept fighting us, that they needed all that space for gathering. So I know where you're coming from. But I think it's just one of those battles we just have to work through with the client. And then I agree with the comment about the stadium wanting to go out to the street north of it. I think it needs the plazas want to extend to the street and the corners to create more of a gateway. And on game day, we'll be coming from every single direction. So having those arrivals on every corner would be good. But I think you've come a long way, and especially with the detail at number 2 in the main plaza area. Good job.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this actually is a project I want to continue on, and I really want to like develop more about the arrival and also like the age of this project to the neighborhood and the people living there. Like so that the project can provide a streetscape and also like a way to order, because right now the houses in the neighborhood, they have like fences which showing the concern for the safety or for not being bothered. And I definitely should do like stretching consideration of the promenade and the pedestrian to make them more pleasant and more connected into the neighborhood. And I guess that would be more integrated. So thanks for the advice. Thank you.
What's the stadium hold? How many people?
This stadium was planned for 15,000 people. Mhm. Sure.
Okay, so I want to keep it, just emphasize the place, the stadium part doesn't seem to work, given that volume of people.
Oh, you mean for the surface parking or?
Both parking and circulation,
Okay.
but then also how do you get in and out of it to make the entire thing work Saturday? In some ways, because that's the biggest thing here, the biggest physical piece here.
Yeah.
If that doesn't work, I'm not sure you get the rest.
So for like
It just kills each other.
okay.
And I think that gets to a different level of questions, which is, I'm not sure what holds this design together. It looks like a bunch of fragments rather than one design. And so even looking at your statement, place for the people to gather and serve some neighborhood, that by itself is a description, but not a vision. And so I'm not sure how the city buys into this.
So do you mean that there is a lack of consistent movement of like the whole site?
Not sure I see those. And I think, and I think the ribbon scares me.
Okay.
And because of the way bicycles work. Like even if you go to Central Park, there are places where they have the traffic signals up to get people across. Bicycles are wonderful, but they like to go fast. And they don't like to stop for people. And so I see a lot of just cross traffic parts.
Yes.
It's the middle and the sides actually serve each other, as opposed to you jump in the middle and you stay there.
Yes, Bruce actually suggested me last time to like kind of separate the walking and the biking, and I definitely should work more on that one. So
yeah, and you can look at, it's a different kind of thing, but Queen Olympic Park, the Velodrome in London, actually does separate. There's a whole separate thing for the bicycles, so they can go fast enough.
Sure, on my list.
Kill American tourists.
Any final notes? All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
All right, Ingrid.
Adam, we have 3 more guests that are on Zoom.
Do. So Claire, do you want to introduce yourself briefly? Make it
Yes,
bigger.
absolutely. Oh, thanks. Not too big. I know that's a really big screen in there. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much. I'm really excited to see your work this afternoon. I'm Claire Edelman Heath. I am a landscape architect and principal at Asakura Robinson. And I've also had the wonderful opportunity to be a lecturer with Hope Hasbrook for the first year MLA Design Studio. So looking forward to seeing your project this afternoon. Thanks, Adam.
And then we have a couple of viewers. I don't know, Mirka, if you're online or participating, you want to say hello?
Yes, hello. So I'm Mirka Benish. I'm a historian of landscape architecture and teach the 2 graduate lecture surveys. Know many here and am just enjoying listening in very much.
Thank you. Thank you for hanging out. And then Lida Lindstead, she is a fellow student of this cohort. She's just in a separate studio, but has been sort of with this group, and I think will probably rejoin for the last semester as well. So Lida, thanks for hanging in there.
Hi, everybody. Good work.
Yeah.
Why do we miss you?
I know it's so weird. I haven't seen you guys hardly at all.
Please.
Well, fantastic. So we will let Ingrid introduce herself, and then
Adam, do you want me to say hi?
yes, sorry. We got another
Sorry. You
sorry.
completely confuses me. I get
Not at all.
every time I'm on it, but I'm Jennifer Orr, landscape architect, owner and principal at Studio Balconies.
Yes.
So nice to see you all. Studio Balconies.
Well,
So did Ilsa participate yesterday?
She did yesterday, yeah.
So when you were there with Ilsa, Bruce, yesterday afternoon, right? Talking to you, Bruce, yes. And they're partners. Ilsa and Jennifer own that firm. They're partners. So,
Adam, if I could just take a moment, I wanted to introduce somebody that's in the room with me, which is coworker Deanna Sines, who's an architect from Columbia and a recent graduate from the MLA program at Berkeley. So she hasn't said anything yet, but I'm getting lots of comments.
well, thank you. Welcome and happy to have everyone participate.
well, this is the first time I think the critics outnumber the students.
Yeah, I know, I was like, don't imitate me.
If people can hear me better without my mask, I can take it off if everyone's comfortable.
Your choice.
Okay, I'll take it off. Be a bad girl. Hello, my name is Ingrid Tower. Thank you for joining me and everyone else here today. I'm going to start off with going over an overview of Albuquerque from a larger scale, getting into the plants of the region, and then briefly talk about the history of agriculture in Albuquerque, specifically this neighborhood that we're working in. And then I'll go into some of the forms and typologies that I used in this design and where it shows up. So starting with the climate of Albuquerque, I know that most of us, when we think about Albuquerque, we think of dry, arid, mountainous area, and that is correct. It is in fact exactly like that. But specifically why and how that is in this area, the Rio Grande, which feeds the surrounding agricultural fields of Albuquerque, has seen a lot of modifications in the past several years because of humans overtaking their water from this area, as well as because of the structure of the river being modified for agricultural fields. It's been severely degraded. So while we have these two ecoregions that bisect this area of New Mexico, the Albuquerque Basin ecoregion, which is this larger one here, and then the Rio Grande floodplain ecoregion, which is right next to the river, both of which are distinct by their plants such as the blue grama yucca and juniper for the basin, and then for the floodplain, the willow and cottonwood make up what is the distinctive bosque of the Rio Grande. So I was really taken by these plants. Being from Austin, I loved that I could see some similarities, and yet these really distinct species like false indigo and all these plants were surviving in this kind of extreme climate that has experienced half the amount of rainfall that it's supposed to get in the last 15 years. So normally 10 inches a year are what falls in Albuquerque, and it's had less than 5. So something that also piqued my interest is I'm a big forager. I love learning about edible plants, and I immediately saw that in some of these disturbed habitats, there were a lot of plants popping up that maybe weren't native, but were edible. And I think that there could be a case in using those for the design. And I thought so early on. So Albuquerque was first settled by, or rather first expanded with early agricultural communities. So the neighborhood that we're working in, Bareilles, which is this region right here, one of the two, I should say, neighborhoods, was first settled by farmers that were surrounding what was the acequia, or sorry, the Madre ditch of Bareilles, which was actually along this road right here. And now it's been dried up and is no longer in use, but the earliest community was around that road, what is now a road. Then with the railroad coming, a lot of workers ended up spreading towards where they were doing their work. So the neighborhood kind of spread out to the east and expanded in that way after the 1880s when it came. And then after that, you saw more people going to what is now the historically significant 4th Street, because it at the time was known as Route 66. And we see these very distinctive automobile stores that are still in existence today. So, but however, what is mostly important in terms of my design is the fact that there are these agricultural roots to Borellis. Both the Borellis Neighborhood Coalition and there was a Borellis placemaking studio by the local college have advocated for bringing back urban agriculture to the rail yard, but also the larger area of this region. So people are very proud of what was once a agricultural community. However, as most of us have discussed, there is definitely a concern for potential gentrification of this site. So there is a study done by some landscape architect related people that found that there's a couple of different metrics that can really make certain projects more prone to gentrification. One of them is that it's adjacent to public transportation, and the other is that it's a location that is close to downtown. In purple, that is the downtown region, and in orange, that is our site. As we know, there's a local transit station that is just up the way right here. And obviously we have the rail system, which is hoping to turn into something that is more usable. And on top of that, Borellis specifically has very low housing value compared to the rest of Albuquerque. So it dotted here is the average house value for Borellis, and then orange is for the average Albuquerque house values. And on top of that, majority of the people of this neighborhood are actually renters. And so those kind of combinations have historically been used to kind of quantify what is potential for gentrification. However, a lot has been set up to resist this. Most of these are based in Borellis, and there's different communities. So there's certainly a pushback, and people are planning accordingly. Getting into the basics of my design. How am I doing on time? Okay, so these are the general systems. As I mentioned, there's a transit center, Borellis, and then this is the 2nd Street. We have Barbe, which is the other neighborhood. Circulation, which I'll get into more of, and then water flow is important to my site as well, and trying to rethink the acequia, which is made to the agriculture historically. So this is my site, important. So what I wanted to do was, how can we rethink and reintroduce the residents to their agricultural roots as requested, and also use the acequia and other agricultural forms, both in landscape and in the acequia itself, to organize the site and to bring different spaces to it. So I'm going to attempt to zoom in here. Oh, okay, I already messed up. I did press control, but
Hold it, yeah.
I am holding it.
And scrolling with your wheel button.
Can I do it with my fingers now?
Control plus.
I'll try control plus. Nope. So it's fine. Adam might troubleshoot. I'll just keep talking. So there is a main entryway that comes and connects into the individual neighborhoods at each of these intersections. But really, what I wanted to think about was creating a gradient of spaces that connects to the stadium, which is up at the north end of the site, as well as kind of dedicating the eastern half to a fully functioning urban agricultural center. And
Sorry.
it's okay. And thank you. Nope. Can you do a somewhat crazy? So
You want to zoom in?
I do.
To what?
It's okay. It's okay. So, so what you see here is there is an acequia. Awesome. Okay, so at the okay. Oh my God. I'm really trying to keep it together. Okay. So we have an entryway upcoming that connects into downtown that goes down into what is a celebratory space that links the rail yards, which has a market every week into the stadium. Outside the rail yard is a more piecemeal type garden space that is fed by a floodplain irrigation system. People are guided to different areas of the site using agricultural typical plants, as well as dips in the ground, which is the acequia system collecting rainwater and AC condensate. Going over to
Next page.
nope, I just want to now pan. Press space bar. Yeah, press space bar. So here, this is the Urban Agricultural Center, outside of which you start to see different gradients coming out, connecting to more public space, including the rail transit center, which people will come out of and lead into the stadium or into the market. So I kind of wanted there to be some protection from people having these floods of individuals which are coming to the soccer games, as well as wanted there to be an economic opportunity for the residents to both learn life skills, such as at the agricultural system center, as well as to actually be able to, I am so behind. Okay. As well as being able to actually harvest things. So this is just a scaled in section of the upper half of the eastern side of the site. I drew from different typologies in agricultural systems, including hedgerows as a way of dividing the site and providing also benefit to critters. And then as well as using detention pond and other acequia forms, which we'll see in a second, to guide people and to provide irrigation using not just rainwater, because there isn't enough, but also AC condensate from the agricultural center. These are my plants, which we can't get into. So the bottom half is what connects into the transit center. In this, we start to see, I wanted to demonstrate better what are these forms of the acequia, which I'm utilizing. And that includes this idea of the diversion canal, which moves water from the Madre, what is the main ditch, which is sucked away from the Rio Grande. And in doing that, I basically utilize it to create these individual gradients of people stepping down into the more public space. The infiltration canal, which is an earthen bottomed, allows water to sink into, that's when the canal bottoms out and water goes into the ground. And that's how these various agricultural crops and otherwise are given water. Floodplain is how exactly that happens, where it dips off, and then detention basin as a way of holding and releasing water at given times. And that's done. I am releasing the floor now. Thank you for bearing with me with my scrolling.
So, yeah, go
I was
ahead.
gonna say real quick, a good 5 or 10 minutes, just putting some bold labels on here.
Yeah, I know, yeah, I fully agree with you. The labeling in general, it just was last step.
And I mean, we did spend a good 2 or 3 minutes talking about the gentrification issues. And it didn't seem like that is sort of addressed in what ended up being the site design. Maybe I'm missing it, maybe I'm not. But what I appreciate that the scope of the graphic is very clear on what you're proposing versus the adjacent neighborhood. But whenever you're trying to sell this to the community, it might make sense to sort of bleed the graphic a little bit more to make it seem like it's sort of interconnected with the adjacencies instead of looking like it's this block that's placed in the middle of the neighborhood. So just thinking about that.
I just wanted to have this up to fully, yeah, the gentrification. It's difficult to address it because the site is going to get built anyways, but basically my way of contributing something was providing this agricultural center, which will be dedicated to research and training of people, and then people will hopefully also be able to grow their food to supply to the market.
So is that the building in the top
Yeah,
right corner?
yeah.
And then what's the building in the middle? I mean, I know that's. the
This
street.
right here,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
the transit center.
Okay. Did you not, so was housing not a component of this? Was that an option?
You could, I don't think any of us landed on doing it ultimately
Well, 'cause
because it's very
I
complicated.
mean, first of all, I totally appreciate the fact that you actually really looked at the grittiness of Albuquerque, the plants, the water. I mean, because I just feel like so often when people design the Southwest, they're just like, they don't understand how different it is. So I appreciate that. But if you are going to talk about gentrification, I mean, I think, it's a problem in Austin. It's code and it's affordable housing. So, I mean, granted, you're just, I know, you're designing an entire city basically by yourself. But I do think that thinking about like spaces for affordable housing, incentives for affordable housing, whatever, however that comes into it, again, it's not like you can rewrite the code and all that, but I do think a nod to that would be smart on some level.
Yeah.
Is it that this area is set aside for affordable housing? Is it that so much of the housing around has a percentage? I mean, I think it's really the only way you do it is you have to teach the code. I mean, it's awesome with learning.
Yeah.
So anyways, but I really do appreciate that it's very grounded in Albuquerque, and I that's important because I think it's much harder to design in a desert landscape probably than anywhere else, I think. It's tough.
Definitely. Yeah, especially because people want, urban agriculture, but there's often not enough water. Even the pecan crops, which is like Albuquerque's thing, people are
flooding.
taking too much.
Yeah. So you kind of don't care about the stadium, do you?
I care about it because it's bringing a huge volume of people to the site that are going to have the opportunity to learn about the agricultural center.
But I feel like, but it's on its own, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like you have all these wonderful paths and connections, and you rolled in the water, and you rolled in the pedestrian, you rolled in the planting, it's really nice, but like, honestly, just some arms to the stadium and
I know.
any color you want. You don't have to have it all figured out, but I think you have to have that intention. That it feels like it's on its own.
Yeah, and it's funny because I know what I want, and I have some very specific design things that I
mean, it could be 10
just didn't have time to get into.
You're gonna do 10 pedestrian bridges that are just black lines.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I think there's some sort of visual that you're trying to bridge the two.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Deanna from Reed's room here. I have just one little comment kind of merge into a question, and it's about, did you think about contamination in the soil? This is an old rail yard, right? So for growing food and having water exposed, and this is, I mean, for everybody really that's using water that's going into the soil, did you think about contaminants that could possibly, be built into the soil, and then growing food is a challenging aspect here?
Yeah, so big picture wise, in terms of what, soil will be used if it's contaminated is, I'm just gonna say, because I can do the general hand waving for now, but it would be a cap and fill situation. As far as the water is concerned, there is a biofiltration system set up that, of course, I just didn't have time to get into the showing it, in depth, but essentially these are terraces which will filter out and clean the water. And then as well as the aeration happens with the stepping that occurs at these dams. And then I actually read a report that was done by, it was some agricultural association of New Mexico, and they were saying that they are trying to change any kind of rules that there may be about not being able to utilize reuse, water reuse for watering agricultural plants. But yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
To tie into that, hi Ingrid, it's nice to see you. I appreciate the regional sensibility of the work. This is a project that makes me think it'd be so interesting to see more of a sense of change over time for the site and how you plan to build it out. And I think that would allow you to not do some of the big hand waving that's been done that I think is undermining your proposal. And in the same way, because this, especially with agriculture, it won't come into being all at once. What are some of the ways it could come together and be a bit more interesting? And then, similarly, there are some things that, like the contamination in the rail yard, and also the HVAC condensate often has, metal particulates and things that are not ideal for uptake in agricultural plants. So just keeping those things in mind as I hope you continue to work with urban agriculture, because I think it's a really wonderful thing to bring communities together. And then I also would like to echo, I can appreciate if you don't feel like the football stadium is the right program for the site, but if you're either remove it or engage it. But right now it's just this, it's again, really fighting the rest of your proposal. So I would love to see what you would have done, either if it wasn't there or if you had really said, this is going to become part of my site. Because I think it isn't yet realistic about the amount of people that would come and what that amount of people would do to the rest of what you proposed. And then last, I just want to comment, I think I appreciate your engaging social issues and the aspects of gentrification. And I just wanted to comment on that you said the site was settled, but of course, the ancestral Pueblo are extremely important to New Mexico. And so I think just mentioning colonization and not starting the timeline in the 1880s would be important, especially when dealing with the acequias.
Very good point.
Anyone else? Rob or Reed? We have what, a minute or so?
We've got 12.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Can we just not?
Can you tell me a little bit more? I'm sorry, just so I totally get the urban agriculture. What's in front of the stadium? Explain that again to me just a little bit.
Okay,
I'm just trying to
let's do
understand
that.
a little better.
Well, I'll waste a lot of meal time. We can do this.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, well, this is Reed. I don't have much to add. I really agreed with Claire's point about the stadium and the agriculture. They're both challenging directions, and I don't think the marriage has worked out too well. The agriculture aspect, which is obviously what you're interested in, is interesting, and I think it'd be a great thing to develop. I'm not sure that you could afford the amount of land that's devoted to this site, or that is within the site, rather, to devote it all to agriculture. There's a lot of other competing uses in the city. So I applaud you on working on the agriculture part, but you need to find another place for the stadium.
Yeah, so I think, so my original plan, these were just two open like celebration lawns, and I feel like kind of cutting up the space to allow for these more agricultural forms, this being terracing, and this is like a platform that people walk out to look out. And then this acequia that's kind of bisecting the site as well, almost like cuts up the nod to the stadium too, as it, you imagine big space, big games, big lawn. And I know that's just one minor thing, but I question that decision for myself. But this I was imagining as like a big wayfaring type vertical garden structure that again is supposed to be like, hey, big thing happening here, like welcome in, come in through from, I can't remember the street now, but that again is not depicted, so we shan't talk about it. And then as far as maybe filling out more things for the stadium, I think that's really good feedback and totally fair. Eventually there was a divide in the roads, and I decided to go down the hard road of just like dedicating it more to agriculture and then sucking from the stadium for like AC condensate more so. But I do think that really what it comes down to is it about the stadium or is it about, how much do we give back to the residents too? And the residents themselves have requested that this site be dedicated as an urban agricultural area. And, I think it's difficult to kind of balance those activities. I'm luckily not in the difficult spot of having to decide what is, the best economic decision and having to run those numbers. But, I really feel like that should be valued and explored.
So why not have it take over the stadium?
Like grow food on the
your-
stadium
well, if
walls.
that's your
Let's
hypothesis,
do it. But I feel like,
I'm just saying, if that's your hypothesis and that's what you're trying to weave in,
yeah,
like forget the vertical garden away from the stadium, put it right next to the stadium, or do something that, yes, you can take water from the stadium, there's no doubt about that, but I think
I see, yeah.
there's a mixing there that could actually make it pretty exciting.
Yeah, and again, I've thought all this out so much. We could talk about it for hours, and I know what I want to do, but it's like when it comes down to graphically producing it, there's not enough time. But I was thinking of doing like a green roof system on the stadium,
totally.
and then also on this parking garage, which is adjacent to it. And then I wanted there to be, it's all these ones, but can you actually make it happen? But there to be like, these are stepped, in my mind, retail spaces, like Pueblo style, and there would be like a garden bridge like linking them all on the second floor. But I already overcomplicate things so much that it's kind of like I had to make choices, and these are the choices I made. But I think it's totally fair. It is like, what's that there for?
Ingrid, I would encourage you, if you like to layer systems in, perhaps rather than fighting it, to just keep going. I think the ideas you mentioned are great. Just like Jennifer said, there's a lot of opportunity there. If, for example, since you chose to leave the stadium, the site, there's a lot about food equity and health equity and encouraging recreation throughout, and how you can blend that and urban agriculture are really interesting program types. So I think just keep pushing it and put all of it in there.
This is Reed. I have another comment that applies to this scheme, but it applies to many of the others. I'm an old fogey, and when I learned design, I learned it with a pencil and a scale, like Bruce did. And I think obviously there's a role for that kind of design work or those design tools, as well as what's on the computer. The danger that happens, we see a little bit in this, and we saw it in the previous project, is that the computer graphics take over, and you lose the sense of scale and the sort of the nuance of a lot of things. I think the computer graphics are great for the final presentation. They're wonderful, but there needs to be a lot more thought on a more detailed level. And I think it really needs to come from using a scale and a pencil to kind of build that in a more subtle and more detailed kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, again, maybe an old fogey talking, but I think it's true.
No, I would agree with you, Reed. I think that my challenge to you would be next design, forbid yourself from getting into the computer till much later in the design process. Because I'm sort of at the generation where I had one foot in the old ways and one foot in the new.
Yeah.
And you do lose part of the thought process when you go straight to the digital. And I think what's another thing that it feels like is you had such a strong idea with the acequia and the water distribution. And then you went too quickly into the detail of how all that works, that you kind of lost the opportunity to develop the site design in a way that was a little bit more methodical and built you towards that detail. So you had a wonderful idea and a lot of passion, but that sort of, jumping in deep into that Isakia part sort of left all these other pieces sort of hanging out there. And when I look at the plan and I go, where would I want to be dropped into? What elements of this do I want to experience that look interesting? And it's all really focused along that east side Isakia area. And I think that's just due to the amount of excitement you had for developing that system. So it's almost like you needed to step back a little bit and then work yourself to that level of detail without sort of forgetting the rest of the site. And maybe that's not true, but that's the impression I get.
Yeah, no, I think, come the night of the deadline, I never want to touch a computer again. So I really, and I think like even the theory of maybe spending time more on producing these other site designs that would perhaps pay more homage to the actual stadium is very fair. And this is all really great feedback. And I appreciate it.
If I could add, I think you're forever going to have this challenge in your career. I still have team members who run into this, I run into this, where you have to get a lot documented, right? And that's why we have a process that we like to document, which people have talked about enough here. Like if you are doing trace paper overlays, you scan those in. If you're doing vignettes, you scan those in. Because we always run out of time. Any project we've ever done, because it's never enough for us. We're like thirsty to make it better. We've got passions and ideas, but you have to have something that polices that, because when you're passionate about the urban ag is palpable, you can feel it, you got us excited, we're on board, and then not being able to carry it all home as an overall plan happens to the best of us. But what I would suggest is you started with diagramming, even in your early diagramming, put narratives over each quadrant of design that is what you want to happen there. So say you don't get to the stadium articulating it, you have a mission statement for the stadium quadrant. This stadium, we're going to reuse the plant state, we're going to plant on the roofs, we're going to tie in this market street with farm to table food that you can buy at an affordable price. We're going to put overlooks on the stadium where you can, on a smoke break, drink break, you can overlook the agriculture and know the story of it. Even if you can't draw all that out, because depending on what medium you use, you might never get there. If you can narrate it and put it down in bullet points, design goals or whatever, just get it on there in any way possible.
Yeah.
Because what I see in our teams too, we get caught up in this computer rendering, this marketing finished drawing, and more time is spent getting that done than actually conceptualizing ideas. So it's going to be a challenge forever. But if you can just get information out of your creative brain onto the document in shape or form. So if you run out of time, at least I can tell what your design stories are for the various areas and big sweeping arrows connecting the stadium block to the thing.
It can be ugly. Just put something down.
Well, and we use drawings to manipulate the conversation between us and the client. So if there's a big fat arrow there, then it will remind you in your presentation with the client to be like, one of our overarching goals here is to make sure we connect the stadium to the urban ag, and here's 5 ways in which this can happen. And then, it's a little bit of a cheat, but it's using drawings to manipulate the conversation. They don't have to be beautiful and finished. It needs to be more about the content and vibe.
I like that, yeah.
But it's definitely a challenge you'll always come across.
I'm glad you stopped at this graphic. This is what you're good at. These are very clear to me of what you were trying to communicate. And saying that, I think all of us, particularly, when we were in school, we soon figured out what we were good at, things that we were not so good at, and things we were terrible. And, don't bang your head doing the terrible. Put them aside. You're going to get to them later. the things that you're good at, get even better at them, and become effective with the things that you're good at, and don't worry about the other stuff, okay? Then there are the things that you're, with a little bit more work or a little more time, I could get good at these. And slowly add those to your toolbox of ways of communicating your ideas, which is about communicating your ideas. You had a lot of ideas. I think you were overwhelmed by the site, and you really didn't like the idea. Well, I'm not going to say what you liked and didn't like, because I'll get myself in
Is it the
trouble.
P word?
But there were things about the project you didn't care much about. I would encourage you for this last semester that's coming up, figure out what you're good at. I have a feeling what some of those things are, and just get really good at them. And then pick the ones that you, with a little work, I'm repeating myself, but maybe pick one of them or two of them and try to get them up to a point where you are not so overwhelmed by all this stuff.
Ideas.
And that would be my recommendation to you. And then just lastly, and those of Alex, I'm sorry, and Nicole, and I'm sorry I don't know a lot about you folks, but in an office, if you take on a job and the client has certain requirements, you don't have, you have to satisfy those requirements. You may not care for what some of the things that, and Adam, of course, I include Adam. You don't have a choice, but there are strategies to maybe convince the client otherwise of some of the things, but there's some basics that you just have to do, or else walk away from the project. And of course, you can't do that in school, and we know the result that would cause. So sometimes we do things we don't care about, but I found in the things that I didn't care about, I would find something in it that I could care about. And then go from there. And as that, then it ripples, and pretty soon, before you know it, you're dealing with the things that you're not so fond of.
No, I need to bring up an environmental justice question.
Now you'll have all the comments.
No, this is important. You walked into this, unfortunately.
Let's
You
do
said
it.
you overcomplicated. I'm not sure that's true. I think you under-owned.
Under-owned?
Yeah.
Okay.
Under-owned. You brought up affordable housing, didn't address it. You brought up the stadium, didn't address it. You could have put 12,000 units there, but didn't. The big one, though, is that you tapped a river.
What river?
The river you're using to fill your Oseki.
The AC condensate river?
No. You said you're pulling water from the river.
Oh, the what?
The Madre?
That was the
That was the history. That's what Asakias do, is they normally,
Where did you get that big pool of blue?
from this is the AC condensate from the urban ag center.
Pool of blue
As
is
well
a
as-
detention basin from the
Yeah.
surrounding watershed.
Yeah,
They mix, but her source would be AC condensate.
yeah.
Okay, then in that case, it's not an environmental justice question, but it is a math question.
How many gallons are we talking?
Acre feet at this point, if I'm looking at that correctly. So your slip
don't
about
remember. I
tapping
have to
the
consult
river
my
is actually
audio guide.
important. Because you do not own surface water rights here. And in New Mexico, not even the state might own.
So,
So you may be feeding the Navajo people. You need to be aware of those things.
yes, you are correct. However, the surface water rights in New Mexico are actually more lackadaisical, especially for Acequia owners, because it's actually a community-based system. And so they are granted special water rights where they can essentially be guaranteed and
Check
give
your
them.
appeals court rulings, but yeah, okay.
No, please do. I mean, I did the reading for this
And
question.
don't add watercolor to your pretty good.
I will.
You know, you and Carr out there overlooking the Rio Grande each of you did some really nice watercolor. That's another one.
I know, I plan on hand drawing more, and I really did enjoy that experience. And I think that there's a lot of value in, of course, hand drawing and watercoloring especially.
Ingrid, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank Moving right along. Sarah. So holding control and scrolling is supposed to work if you want to zoom in.
Let's test this out before we get in there.
Hold that and scroll. Don't click, just roll in and roll out.
Now, how do I pan? I would like to.
Well, you can't because you're not zoomed in. So zoom in and then let go of control. I think. No, and then keep our.
Okay, it's just kind of
Too speedy? You want me to slow down?
No, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
I don't know that I need to do much of that.
And then control 0 gets you back to. Bye.
Hello.
Introduce yourself to that.
Yeah, are we ready to go?
Yeah, we're ready.
Hi y'all, my name is Kara Khan. I'm a third year MLA1 student. And here we go. So I'm going to kind of order my presentation along Bruce's recommended way of what did I do, why did I do it, and why do I think that's important. And so what I did is I focused on, I prioritized both the conveyance of water quality, as well as connection throughout the city to the site. And so those two systems that I identified that make the site opportune for those systems is stormwater infrastructure. So the rail yard site sits just above some major cross pipes that are happening underground, as well as including the detention basin on site. And it's only 1,500 feet away from the Rio Grande. So there's not a lot of space between our site and the river. So kind of what's going through our space is going to be going into the river pretty quickly. And then the other system I was interested in connecting to is the rail trail connection. I believe that's the project that Rob is working on. And so that's just a rail to trail system that's connecting rail up here, and it'll be coming down through First Street on our site and then going down further, connecting to the rest of the rail yards. And so what I did is I chose the rail and the river as my two major interpretive forms for site connection. The river I chose because for thousands of years it's supported life in this area. It's why people settled in Albuquerque. It's supported agriculture, it's drinking water, it's escape, respite for modern day residents. And the rail is what made Albuquerque a city, changing Old Town to New Town, sparking growth, and of course, creating our site, which is the rail yards, which employed up to a quarter of the city during World War II. It's just a really important relic of Albuquerque's past. An industrial history. So the river and the rail are going to be two major forms that you'll be seeing throughout the design. And these kind of diagram parties you're seeing are actually what the paths look like. So you'll see. So you can see those paths here. The river path kind of meanders across the rail path. The rail path is your more utilitarian, takes you straight to where you want to go. The meander is more of if you want to take in the different programs of the park. And you can see that connection. So the rail to trail would be entering here along First Street, and it will take you just down further to the rest of the rail yard site that the city will be developing. Okay. And so these axons here are exploring the different
components of the site. So showing what is seeded versus planted versus lawn, architectural massing. And so what I've created here is this kind of retail main hub here. So connecting the soccer stadium to retail, to grocery and public use. And so that's kind of this section that we'll explore later. The industrial reuse of the firehouse for a restaurant, and the rail yards for a gallery, event center, and its current use of the rail yard market. 2 parking garages, a hotel and event center up there at the top. Yeah, that's about it. So we can see here the rail and the river again, but also some hard versus soft plazas showing primary versus secondary plaza. And then some tertiary circulation on reclaimed brick plazas, kind of connecting the space. So the rail and the river are more interpretive systems. There are 2 more functional systems. The first is the arroyo, which is happening kind of in the interstitial spaces between the rail and the river. And then the constructed wetland, which is replacing the detention pond with a more activated space. And we'll talk about those a little further. So we have talked about how the site is a brownfield. I've kind of zoomed us into the northern end of what City of Albuquerque now owns for the rail yards. So you can kind of see that window where we're looking right now. But the remediation for this northern half has been completed. A few structures were demolished, and there was some significant soil excavation here in the battery storage area and here in the sandblasting area. They removed 900 cubic yards of contaminated soil. The current condition of the site, they believe that there is shallow all the way across the expansive site, and they think that there is some lead pollution, but not enough for them to warrant, driving and scraping the whole top half off. And there is some asbestos and lead-based paint happening around the structures, but they have, and that is why they demolished the ones that they did. So the 2 systems being the arroyo, which is to collect surface drainage or surface runoff, and then the wetland, which is replacing the detention pond. So it's taking water from up the system, mainly from South Broadway, holding it, cleaning it with a few different special plants, and then releasing at times where it reaches capacity down into the river, as does the arroyo in extreme rain events. The importance of this arroyo feature is highlighted by the climate of Albuquerque, because it is kind of a feast and famine monsoonal climate. Throughout this whole portion of the year, pollutants are accumulating on the ground surface, and then when it rains, they all get washed out. And so it's important that when those rain events do happen, that there is something standing between those concentrated pollutants and the Rio Grande, which already struggles. In addition to the fact that the site itself is contaminated. So doing what we can to kind of offset and maybe even create a net positive for ecological remediation. Here just shows kind of the wetland versus detention pond. It's not hard to imagine that a constructed wetland would be more interesting than an empty detention pond, but just the benefits that it would provide, including flood control, as the detention pond already does, but also habitat, aesthetic value, and soil and water quality. So the 4 systems we're working with to interpretive, the rail and the river, and the functional, the arroyo and wetland. I like to base the form and the contents on their kind of inspiration. And so form we show in the top left of each of these clusters. So actual rail based on Google Earth shots of what the rail actually looks like and some of the forms that we find there. The arroyo, how it gathers at the base and it funnels down into one thicker stream This is based off Oxbow Wetland, off the Rio Grande, cut off meander, and then the river, so just the meanders of the Rio Grande. Pulling for the flora and fauna, went into iNaturalist and just saw what people were noticing, what people were identifying, and found some really interesting results, like a Great North American porcupine that 8 different people identified in the same area up in the trees. So it also showed me a little bit of what people find interesting about seasonal variety in these different ecosystems. And so I propose planting these areas based on the plant community that you would find naturally along these spaces. So looking in the sections, studying the longitudinal, kind of the axis that the rail path creates. So from your rail trail site entry all the way down to when you want to reach the rail yard, and the kind of scale of those spaces there. And then across the diagonal axis from 2nd to Commercial Street. These axons are different studies of what these areas would look like in use. So the retail stadium entrance, the Great Main event lawn, the event lawn, the natural play space, what it would look like on market day and at Market Plaza, and then the kind of more naturalistic constructed wetland. And finally, looking at more of these cross sections, the Commerce Center, how the rail yard market would be used on market day, and then the space kind of framing the stadium. Yeah, that's all. So the general, yes.
There's a lot to unpack, I think, because you've done a really good job at this. And I think when you first pulled this plan up, I kind of was thinking like, ooh, what's going on here? I can't wait to hear. And I really like how you've taken that idea of the river and the rail and then very strongly made that the basis of the form of your design. And I think it's led to a very interesting arrangement of buildings and arrangement of spaces, outdoor spaces for people. And I think that that form of the river that you settled on really has the opportunity to create some very interesting and different spaces. So as pedestrians move through the open space, that, you know, could really lend it to a series of unique experiences as you move through those sort of different shapes and landforms. So I think that's pretty awesome and very strong, the impact it had on the design. Could you go to the next sheet? The next one after that. So do you mind zooming in real quick to some of these? I just was interested in the kind of plant palettes.
Oh, too far.
Yeah, there you go. So I think, you know, these graphics are very effective in terms of relaying your idea about why and how you planted these areas in different ways. I don't know that the graphics are super strong in terms of making me want to be in those places. And I think that's where, like, especially that first one, which is this grand entrance up to the stadium, you know, it's, you know, makes me think of shade. It makes me think of seating. It makes me think of how I would really walk along here and what elements that I wish were represented. And so it may be that you were really just focusing these on the plant palettes, but it is one of your strongest graphics of what it feels like to be in that place. And there's a little something lacking, I think, to making me want to be there. Then if you could flip to the next page. So I think the sections work really well. I was having a little bit of trouble with the isometric sketches of where those were occurring, and are they supposed to relate to the sections above, or is there a plan with some sort of keynotes? But I'd also want to zoom into those, because that started getting me really interested, like the nature, play, and education of wanting to put my feet on the ground. And so to me, those graphics start to tell that story of what the spatial experience might be when your feet are on the ground. And because of the scale of them, I can't quite get there. And I think that the quality of space is there. But graphically, I'm begging that those be 10 times as big. And then I think your planting sketches on the other could shrink and still be effective. So I think that's what I've seen a lot with school student projects, is sometimes the most complex graphics are the smallest on the page, and then things that are very easy to read get blown up really big. So I think, think about that, the complexity of the space that you're trying to show, and the amount of space on the page you're giving it. But overall, I think it's really well done, really strong forms, really strong and well thought through ideas. And I love it. I think it's cool.
I think if you, did you do the 20 scale drawings?
So yes and no.
Or did I miss them?
That's what these were supposed to be, and then somehow getting caught up in the layout of the page, they ended up shrinking. And so yes and no.
Yeah, well, what they are is blow-ups. I mean, you didn't do, there should be more detail. The reason I asked the students, they work primarily at 100 scale at the master plan. And then I asked the students to pick 2 areas that they were interested in and develop them at 20 scale to a lot more detail, so they understood the materiality and how things really work. Just blowing 100 scale section into 20 scale doesn't meet the requirement. And oh, I'm sorry. And the reason I'm bringing that up, besides I was thinking maybe I fell asleep and missed them, is to Rob's question, it would have helped you or helped him see what you were thinking in terms of the planting and how to use it. And that was the reason of doing the 20 scale.
Right.
So I think you mostly convinced me on the plan.
Okay.
So the convincing parts are it's the geometry to lay out the river plus the train imprints. Often you just get, we'll call them arbitrary curves, because curves add interest, and that's all they are. But you've actually warped them, thickened them, so that the parts that are captured actually become their own places. And that by itself is an impressive thing.
Oh, thank you.
Now the parts that then don't quite convince me yet.
Yes. Okay.
I'm really not convinced with your parking garages.
Okay.
They look like
Fair.
just add squares.
Yes.
And that's a concern. Also, it's not entirely clear how you can get into some of those parking garages, which comes up with a bigger question, observation, which is not just you. On a regular basis, I'll be extolling our architecture faculty, or maybe extolling, maybe poking, on the point that we as a school don't design enough big buildings.
Yeah.
Like a big building is not just a dorm supersized, it has other kinds of needs. And I think not just your stadium's a little bit better grounded, but also looking at the hotel event center, where that retail is, all of these things need also to be serviced.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do I get not just the consumer in and out, but the trucks that bring the catering and the linens, and for the soccer stadium, everything else. all of that stuff takes up space or it goes underground or something.
Yeah.
And that's why it's as compelling, as convincing as the landscape is around the ribbon of river and rail. When the buildings hit, they get fictionalized in a way
Right.
that detracts from an overall successful spatial organization.
I think there's a lot of open space to be kind of teased out to see, well, is this just an open seated area, or is this an area where that can happen? I thought about it a little bit on the stadium. Like, okay, like this is where the trucks can come. Probably even that parking garage is too small, or parking lot is too small for kind of just like the turning radius of what, you know, a large truck would need.
Well, and that, honestly, that's the kind of thing you would probably try to sink underground. Like you would take, I don't know what, this street off to the, almost the top, but not the top of the stadium. And find a way to sort of like dive on a ramp underneath it.
Yeah, I was considering an underground parking garage as well, but when I dove into the brownfield assessment, they didn't recommend excavation beyond 10 or 15 feet. Because there is groundwater underneath. So
that changes that part. So all
yeah,
the more
it seems a little
need to
more
figure out
difficult.
your surface trucks.
Yeah.
This is really well knitted together, though. I mean, there's a real system here. This, and I think that's hard to do. I really do. I think it's really hard to take a big site. I mean, you would never do the snow railroad by yourself. You would
Right.
have a civil, you would have an architect. I mean, that's the one thing I hate about school. It's like one person's gonna design
In 6
blocks
weeks.
by themselves. No, you're never going to. But
Yeah.
but what you got, which I think is important, it's cohesive. It speaks to each other. It crosses, like you have 3 crossings over the railroad and they make sense and they connect. You have something that brings a landscape element that comes throughout and connects it. And I think when you're designing big sites, that's what you have to do first. You know, and if that doesn't happen, then the little, I mean, and then of course you go to the next level, the more detail. But I think if the overall cohesion isn't there, it's really tough. And I think you nail the cohesion. The one thing I'm a little confused on, tell me again, so is the water flowing north to south and does it just go into the railroads gallery? That's where I'm confused.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, I think the next slide would, okay, so the overall topography of the site flows northeast to southwest.
Okay.
And so these red dots are kind of showing where I think the inlet drain would be.
Okay.
Whoop, I'm not gonna try to do that.
Because I think it would have been really cool if somehow, I guess it's impossible to railroad, but I wanted you to connect the water to your wetlands throughout. Like because you're absolutely right, constructing wetlands are the answer in the Southwest. I mean, the detention pond is a waste of water. It's a total waste of water. So anyways, that's the only thing that I was like, well, where does the water go? Into the building?
Yeah, I thought that keeping those separate would be interesting in case
Okay.
there is an issue of contaminating, like site contaminants. What's coming in through the wetland is actually stormwater from elsewhere.
Okay.
It's coming directly, there's an inlet into it,
Okay.
and then it can leave immediately. Now, in large storm events, I imagine there will be some spillover
Some
between the
piping
two,
or- okay.
which would be helpful ecologically, but yeah, I think there's some logic for keeping it separate, so there's not like some cross contamination.
So you're saying that when the water on the left side comes all the way south, then it goes into an inlet?
It goes into an inlet and then,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
This is Reed, and can we go back to the site plan? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the site plan is very nice. I mean, graphically, it looks great, and there's a lot of good ideas. But I'm going to say something that is probably unpopular, but I don't have confidence in this scheme or the others in terms of what the stadium really is and what the parking really is. Maybe you did the calculation, and I hope you did, but the sense I have from almost everybody is that the stadium is a big blob that's there that you have to deal with, and the parking may be good, it may not be good. I don't have any basis for judging those. So the basic program here, besides all the things that we've talked about, is really the issue of the stadium and the parking and how those work. And I realize that's not a popular thing to think about. You know, that's not the fun part, but it's really kind of the meat and potatoes of the site plan to understand that. And I would really like to have some rationale for why these things are the sizes that they are. The size of the stadium looks really big, and when I look at the two parking garages, they look really small.
So how far are you from transit? I mean,
The
when I go to FC, there's
transit
no way in
centers.
hell I drive to that place. I'm not an idiot. I take transit spaces.
The
But there's no
transit
way I
center's
should ever
right-
drive there.
Right here.
Just above the
Mhm.
site plan.
So I mean, there might be some system of, you know, is it a,
Well, one thing I think you guys covered well in the midterm review is the way that you would come to the stadium from that transit center just north. And how that's an overpass, we could have a pedestrian, I mean, you guys really got into that, but I haven't seen that today.
Right.
And so he was right on the phone to ask, what's the rationale here? Because, you know, Austin FC only having 200 spaces
Mhm.
for 20,000 people. Without going context, it's ridiculous, but it was designed for that train station.
Right.
So
also we take the train station. So I
Exactly.
say well done.
So that was the rationale, right? But like, I think you had it in the midterm. I think you see that explain that.
So what percentage of spectators are going to come on transit? What's realistic?
At FC, I'm sure it's over 50%. So it has
It's
to
the
be.
first time our trains have been full to capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
France, we just say 75%, you know, like. how-
75%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not an analysis that I did do, and I wish I had now. So I could get
Yeah.
it back.
I don't think it would have taken very long to just make some assumptions about it and write it down in the corner of one part of one sheet and say, this is how I figured it out. This is my assumption, you know, but I'm not seeing that. And so when I don't see that, everything else to me comes into question. You know, is that really the right size? How do they all relate? And when they change, the whole site plan changes. So I'm sorry to be a downer, but it's not just you, it's everybody. Which means it's probably Bruce's fault.
No.
Well, they were given numbers in the report, and they were all given the report even before school started. How many of them read it? I don't know.
Well, it was before school started, so.
Yeah, I mean, we were very fortunate that Rob was able to get a hold of the marketing study that was done for this. And your answers, your questions are answered in that report.
I did read the report, but I don't remember seeing very much about it. I saw some blobs on the, you know, on the diagrammatic plans.
They were there. Numbers were there.
Okay, all right, Bruce. Well, we'll let you off this time. Now, another thing that occurred to me and that I was thinking about before the review started, I mean, and reading through the documentation, you know, when people go to the soccer stadium and you have local fans, there's a lot of, I don't know, hoopla, people celebrating. They're very happy to go to the game. It's kind of a celebration space, and I'm not seeing that kind of space on the way or related to the stadium. And I think that's a lost opportunity. I was thinking about various places I've been, things I've seen in terms of approaching a facility or an event or whatever. And how important that whole approach sequence can be to foster the sense of community, a sense of supporting the team, and so on. One of the great approaches that I ever saw is approach to a shrine in Japan. Now, I realize a Japanese shrine is not the same as a soccer stadium, but they had an amazing 4-block approach where you go through a whole series of sequences to get to the facility. And I'm not saying you need to do that here, but that whole approach sequence is an important thing that I think is a missed opportunity.
I'd agree with that, Reed. So, well, but before I dive into that, I since this first time I'm speaking to this project, I do want to commend you just for the comprehensive approach, and I also agree with all of the thoughts about what a cohesive design and the clear story that you told about taking forms from the river and the rail yard, and I think that was really successful. But where areas where I think, you know, you could continue to develop it are just that, some of the edges of the site, you know, particularly that northern edge where you start to engage some of the more urban areas of the city. And, you know, I don't think that has received the same treatment and what doesn't have the same celebratory nature that you would want if you're coming from the transit center to the site. And I think you could push that even further. And then I still think that there's some programming that could be rearranged a bit. Seeing the grocery store closer to the neighborhoods, and then the rail yard and gallery more, and the event center more related to the hotel and soccer stadium sequence, I think might create a little more synergy in terms of program on the site. But yeah, overall, I think it's a really commendable effort.
Thank you.
Just one last little thing, I think we're about out of time too, is that this, the idea of the edges, like this would be a perfect project to practice scope creep, right? And I think it's an art that we all practice where it's like we're given this boundary and saying like, here's your project, but if you would have extended the meander and changed it so that it was sort of a much lighter dashed like future, whatever, like the city could fall in love with the notion that your project informs additional city blocks beyond this project scope. And I think that, you know, would be really easy to do with this sort of logic. And scope creep's a great thing.
Yeah, I just like, you know, we fortunately went to a soccer game and saw the local team. And I think to your point, we had to park off-site and then walk across the street. And there was a lot going on in those blocks. And I think what's going to happen here, particularly on the South the east of South Broadway or east of the stadium, and probably Bareilles as well, is there's going to be a lot of parking and gathering along the streets, which is an issue, maybe an issue, but nonetheless. And if you don't provide adequate parking, there's going to be more impact on the neighborhood communities that you're worried about impacting.
Right.
And this is not, you know, just about everyone else in the room besides yourself.
I think in the analysis portion, we were hoping to encourage both, you know, walking, cycling, and public transit to also get people to stay and spend in the Bareilles neighborhood as well. But there's always going to be those people who want to drive there and park. So
yeah. And I think you did that. You accomplished that. Okay.
They cut the sound. We don't get to hear the applause.
Yeah, Reed, that was for you.
Oh, thank you.
Next.
How are you folks that are off-site doing?
Hanging in there.
You're able to see and hear okay?
Yeah,
we're doing fine, Bruce. Not
great.
To worry.
Yes, thank you so much.
To a fellow by the name of Cole, I think he's a IT person here, and Adam, if this is all working.
Winging it. We're just making it up.
If they left it up to me, I'd be using my pencil and yellow sketch paper.
Control 0, zoom back out.
All
Okay.
right. For those who were not here this morning, there were 10 students in our studio. 7 of them were MLA students, 3rd year, and 3 were architecture students. 2 undergraduate and 1 graduate student. So next up is a young lady who's going to be graduate. No,
I'm in my 4th year.
Yeah, is in a 4th year architecture. And earlier this morning, we had a 5th year Later on, we're gonna have the third student, but go ahead.
Okay. So hi, my name is Mary Ann, and as Bruce said, I am a fourth year architecture student. My project is entitled Adis Park, and Adis being an island formed by a river. And I used this idea that's come up a lot in a lot of people's presentations of the acequias and the Rio Grande to really inform a lot of the forms of my site. And using acequias as a more structured use of the water with more formal movement, and then the river being more fluid and offering a lot more interesting, I would say, opportunities for similarly to Kara to inform the different spaces and define different regions of my park. So I'll come back to the site plan. Oh, there we go. So this section collage was in my mid-review as well. Oh, no, okay. Yeah, okay. This section collage was in my mid-review as well, but I still, from pretty much the beginning of this process work, has been one of the fundamental keys to defining my project, just the different ideas that I had that I wanted to follow all the way through, which were having retail be a buffer between the neighborhood and the stadium, having a central water feature that the site acequia flowed through, and having a strong auditorium or amphitheater use somewhere on the site that would just offer more of a community aspect when the stadium wasn't in use for soccer. And so I had a few different precedents that I looked at just in regards to amphitheaters, and also this fluidity and using the pathways to define the spaces and create different program areas. And this is just some of my process work that I did very much by the encouragement of Adam and Bruce, just really trying to work more with my hands because I have a habit to stick to Rhino and not sketch as much. So really trying to feel out the spaces in a more literal way with my mind, my hands. So, oh, okay. So first I'm going to look at this retention pond area that I want to repurpose as kind of still a pond, but also wetland. And it's going to be defined by these adises, these islands that are going to be found in multiple different areas of my site. But using these shapes that I took forms directly from the Rio Grande in Albuquerque, and picked forms that I thought just really emphasize this idea of movement, of fun, and using those to define these spaces. So this pond has a bridge that goes across it, and it's an access point from the southeast of the site that connects to the Broadway neighborhood, and to a parking lot that is on that eastern side of the site. Structurally, didn't really look too much into it, and now I'm realizing it kind of just looks like a big floating boardwalk, but just kind of this idea that there's this over the water experience that you get to have in the park, and offers opportunity to really brighten up that space that is a really sad retention pond right now. And then the amphitheater, during my mid-review, I had the amphitheater just being a completely separate area of its own, but I was really encouraged to pursue the idea of using part of the stadium, as the Q2 stadium does, to be a part of the amphitheater. And so I created this section of seating areas that feed into what would be the southernmost entrance to the stadium, that would also serve as a stage when not in use as the soccer stadium. So all of the seating is going up from this lowered down area, with the stage being at the very bottom and leading up to this water feature at the back that provides kind of an infinity edge to one side of this, and then the pathway that leads you up to part of the retail. And so just this kind of idea of, these are also adises, the forms, the pathway in this sense is the water, and the seating areas are the islands. And just looking at like some basic material. For this area, just having like smooth, light concrete for the sidewalk, and then these, let's see if I can zoom in on them. The individual seating areas have like a concrete retention wall around them, and then a gravel path connecting them all the way around. That worked. Okay, and then I'll go back to my site plan. So just obviously there is a lack of labels that I'm realizing now. So I'll, against Bruce's wishes, kind of walk us through the site, but with this being the western edge, the Borellis community having this retail buffer and also an entrance to the park on the other side of this parking lot that leads directly into this open area. And this is the third use of the ADISs in the park, which defines just like greater green spaces that could be used for different things like playgrounds, adult workout spaces, picnic tables, anything that you might want to have. It's just open for the community to use and define the spaces as they please. And then using primary and secondary circulation through there, defining those different islands. And then with the amphitheater in the center, kind of serving as a functional place for games also, for, you know, tailgating per se or celebration, but also for when the stadium is not in use as an amphitheater. And then this connection in the bottom corner to the Broadway neighborhood, as well as this sporting facility for the community, youth soccer fields, and this parking garage that serves also as a sky bridge entrance into the stadium. And then this upper corner being the reception from the transit center north of it. And that's part of the reason why I placed the stadium on the left-hand side of the site, was that that was the side of the site that the transit center is on. And so it would provide the most direct access down into the site. And that's it. That's all I got for you.
So
lower area, remind me,
Just kind of empty area. Is that
the
what you're talking about?
lower, below the amphitheater. Which,
Oh, this is the like park, the open kind of green space.
So it's very green and there's a lot of focus on water. I think, speaking as a New Mexican, we have a very intimate and daily relationship with water, or more specifically lack thereof. And everybody is extremely aware of how finite a resource that is for us. And we do have constructed wetlands, but with that, you have to realize that they're dry or dormant for a long part of the year. And so something like this would take supplemental water to a degree, I think, that the community just wouldn't support it. So you have to think about how these areas work and function in the dry periods of the year. And it can be done, and it can be done elegantly and beautifully and successfully. But this feels like, maybe it's just the rendering of it, but it just feels so water intensive that it doesn't quite feel like Albuquerque to me. And I think, but let's focus on, you know, some of the cool ideas you have. With the amphitheater, I assume that there would be some sort of, you know, stage type area that's a place for maybe performances before games, things like that, which I think is a cool idea. If you could go to that screen, that shot of the amphitheater area.
Click on the plan once and then hit left.
Okay. Right. So the stage would be like the same as the southern entrance into the stadium. So I didn't really approach like the design of that, but just this like large open entrance would also serve as a stage during other times.
Sure. So I think that this could be like so cool, right? And what I would like to see is what happens when you start to overlay how that stage works. You know, it probably needs to get pulled back from the southern entrance a little bit. So as things are wrapping up and people are going to the stadium, there's not a big conflict there. And I also think that when you deal with an amphitheater performance area, you have to think about kind of protecting the view of the stage. And so when people need to go to use the restroom or people want to go get drinks from like a concession stand, things like that, you don't necessarily want them filtering through this sort of labyrinth in front of you and distracting your view of the stage. So I think that, but I think that the concept's strong enough that it would be very interesting to see how you start to layer in these event type of needs. The stage, the bathroom, the circulation, the snack bar, all those things, and still hold on to this very interesting form and idea you have, you know? And I think that could be like a really dynamic and really successful idea. It just needs those layers of sort of function placed on top of them. And how do you hold on to this very cool and fun idea you have, but you know, make it a functional event type of performance space.
Yeah, that was something that I had thought about originally, and I guess I kind of had strayed from the idea of having some central paths on the edges that would just take you directly out of the amphitheater. And I think the more I got into the forms and the trail and stuff, I think I kind of forgot about the more practical aspect of that.
And I would say, you know, you have this strong initial idea, and where you struggled is how that idea alone isn't enough to carry a site of this size. And so you've kind of repeated that idea in multiple places, but there has to be more program of what you do in those spaces placed upon it, because those program goals, like you started to describe them, you know, adult exercise area and nature play and some of those other things that could happen in that park area. But once you really start to think about the needs of those programmatic elements, there's a certain amount of other elements that come along that make it function, right? Circulation and access and views and different things like that. So this just needed a lot more of how do you insert the programmatic elements you talked about into the plan, and then how does the needs of those elements relate to your form or change the form, and how does all that start to work together? So I think it's a really cool start, but there's a lot of sort of thought that needs to go through it to really, you know, make it jump off the page.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I think it just really needed a lot more development. I think I just got a little caught up in my like excitement about those ideas, and kind of I'm a little stubborn and want to stick to just like what my first thought is. But yeah, I think that the development of it would have been very successful.
Well, it actually makes your idea more interesting. I mean, I do think having a form that gets repeated at different scales, different ways on a site helps the site stay together. That makes perfect sense. But the form is not just for form's sake.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's an idea. It's a way to get into it. But it's when that form actually becomes realistic and it becomes part of the program that to me, it becomes much more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a good way to get into a project though, for sure, and a way to keep it cohesive.
Yeah, you do sort of lose the flexibility of the space with all the raised kind of terraces. It feels like there's a lot of trip hazards in this whole thing. You have drunk people walking around listening to a concert, can be sort of an issue. It's a lot of A to C's.
Yeah.
A to C's, I'm not sure. It seems like it's more appropriate for the park program that you had just south of this.
Mhm.
But maybe this being more open and flexible might make more sense.
Or at different scales or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of the scale that you had in the area south might, to me, might work better up here, just because you have more of these larger areas.
But you could have a kid maze at a smaller scale. I mean, I think
Yeah,
there's all these things.
perfect for a kid's maze,
Yeah,
yeah.
there are things you can do, but I just think you have to. I mean, I get it when you have an idea that you're really excited about. I totally get it, but I think that's just the way to get into the project. That's not the
Yeah.
project. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The big plan.
Yes.
I think the challenge here is you didn't go all in.
Mm.
So you decided you like a little island thing. Good enough. But then you regularized it. You said, I'm gonna have some islandy things inside the middle of suburban grids. Instead of, in no way, shape, or form does the stadium have to be symmetric.
Mm.
And some of them, all may are, some aren't. Some aren't by design, and some aren't because you've got like Penn States, which is just added on to every 20 years. Ooh, you know, 20,000 people. So that could have been one of these kind of wonky island shapes. Similarly, there's nothing special about your retail. It could not have been little Zahavi buildings. And then I think also within the zone where you've got the little island things, your shapes are too self-similar. Right? They don't need to be the same size. And if you do begin to modify the size, the number of curves, and even sort of a family of curves within one, you actually open up a diversity of programming. And so, yeah, you had the idea you're interested in, and then for whatever reason you said, I'm scared of it.
Yeah.
But I know how suburban plots work, so I can go back to that.
Yeah. Definitely.
Those would be cool buildings.
But parking by the way has to be rectangular. You couldn't get like doing lofty parks never works.
Okay, yeah.
So find a way to handle that somewhere else.
Gotcha.
Were y'all required to put a certain amount of parking on the site?
Yes. I mean,
okay, you couldn't just assume that you were gonna push transit hard, or I just wasn't sure what the.
I think I kind of tried to base square footage off of what was given from the original proposal.
Sure.
But also just, I don't know, I'm not in my own like bad way. I'm like not super like involved in public transport. So it's like not at the forefront of my mind as much, but I like know it should be. And also this was kind of like.
You're young, you're not involved. Come on now.
I know. I'm also from a place where there's just like no good public transportation. Corpus Christi is not a walkable city by any means, and it doesn't have public transportation. So like that was really a new concept for me in Austin. And even then it's just because I live so close to campus, I never really.
Yeah, once you live in a city without it, you'll.
Yeah, there are people in Albuquerque. People in Albuquerque bicycle a lot.
Yes.
It's very popular.
Very dry,
And it
you know.
has quite a bicycle trail system. Yeah. In fairness, they were given this report, which maybe I shouldn't have given them, but in the report, the consultant is proposing a parking garage rather than surface parking. Now, there was no rationale why they did it, but that's what they did. And I think the students just, at least in this case, just took the square footage of the footprint, and that'll do it. Anyone else? We have one more. We have time for one more.
I agree with all the comments that have been said so far. I think just to follow up on what we said before about context, like I think there were some opportunities here to connect to the neighborhood. It was funny, earlier I was thinking about the stadium and like the octopus head, and like the 8 tentacles like going out into the neighborhood. I mean, that would have been fun with your forms too, although you can't do that with the grid once you get out to the neighborhood as much, but just that idea that we need to see the context and how it connects. And I think it's super important. We talked about a little bit, but with the next few.
Yeah.
How was this experience for you, Marianne?
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this class. It is very different, the scale. like thinking about such large areas. But I think my previous project in my last semester was like a redevelopment of pretty much the entire Deep Eddy site here in Austin, which is like not as big as this, but maybe like a third of it. And so I feel like that was a good transitionary studio to have right before this, to just kind of think at a slightly larger scale and think about landscape and how to connect to different like natural landscapes. Like Deep Eddy is like attached to the river. And so I think having that and then building up to this, and it's really opened up my like mind to how I think about buildings also too, because I was really struggling with like the relationship between these buildings, just like putting buildings in, like how to relate them to the surrounding context of the landscape.
Okay, good, good.
Right.
Okay.
Last one.
Okay. This is the last one. Bowen is a graduate student in the MArch. Oh, we've got two. Sorry. Wait, one?
Okay. You want to try to zoom? Make sure you figure it out. Let me slow that mouse. Let's see how fast it is. There you go. So now it's going to move fast. So hold control and scroll. Just see if you have that. Yeah, plus minus. Okay.
It's easy until you get into the presentation.
Yeah, then it messes up.
Hi guys, I'm Bowen. So I'm in the third semester of Master of Architecture program. So I will start it from some of my experience during the field trip. So as this like photos shows. So when I walk through the site and the community, I feel much sense of contrast. For example, for this pair of photos, the exterior space is usually hot and old, but the interior space is really more comfortable and newly built. And also during the farmers market day, the mechanic building used for the market is full of people and popular, but the building just beside it is very like empty and silent. And also for the scale of the building in the community is much smaller compared to the buildings in the downtown area when you look like through the street. And also I found that the art and the plants are two important elements in the community, and they also like make contrast in both in color and function. And then coming to the broader context, the site used to be a focal point in the past. Right now it's abandoned for a long time. And also right now the large business is all concentrated to the north, especially in the downtown area. And also for the site is at the boundary of two communities, and the railroad just create a hard separation of two regions. So for this project, I aim to like soften the boundaries of two areas and also connect the two regions. And I also want to activate this whole area and make a new focal point. And then I come up with some strategies. The first is to create like more east-west flows and attract people from both communities, and also make the northwest corner as a new commercial area, which is close to the downtown area, and also extend the commercial on the Broadway Avenue to the south to make the Broadway Avenue as a central street for the South Broadway community. You can see from the master plan. And then I choose soften the hard separation created by the railroad. I create a elevated pathway just above it, and it starts from a new small railway stop on the south, and also connect to the stadium, the upper level of the stadium. And then there is a green system including 3 different kinds of parks: the Central Park, the Cultural Park, and the Water Park. And there will be a curved pathway just connect 3 of them. And then come to the detailed view. So this one is a Central Park. So the whole park is a hill or a berm is connected to the elevated pathway here. So it's much easier for people just to enter the main entrance of the stadium on the upper level. And also when people walk through the curved pathway, they will have like different kind of experience here. And the second detailed design is for the water park. So I keep the detention pond and also create different kinds of like wood deck here. So people can have fun here and have different experience for it. And I think that's all.
Could you explain what the colors mean?
The color of the building or the color of the dash line?
The colors on the plan.
On the plan? So the orange color is for the retail or commercial building. So this is a hotel, and these are retail buildings, and these are food courts. And the purple one are for the community use. And the blue is a stadium, and this one is a garage beside it. And this green one is the loading area at the back of the stadium. And the purple one is the elevated pathway.
It's, I would say that you've come a long way from the mid-term, in that there's a lot more clarity with the Central Park and how it addresses the elevated deck. I feel like there was a lot missing there before, but now you decided to burn the whole site, which I think goes along with the whole cap and fill strategy and the issues with the soil on site. And I like the fact that you're not afraid to have a little bit of, I know this might be unpopular, but to have a little bit of vehicular circulation in the site, because things do need, cars are important as well. Not as important as pedestrians, but there are reasons to have streets within a site, and then they also create the sort of urban scale. I think that that is important with what you've done. And yeah, I mean, I feel like there's still a piece missing about how the mixed use in the central spine and how that gets serviced. But I think that could be a really cool place to be, sort of in between the stadium. You're kind of pre-gaming in those bars and restaurants that you do right before you go into the stadium, and that makes a lot of sense. The railway stop, I think we talked about this last time. I mean, the transit, from what I understood, was mostly like city to city and not necessarily within the city. So it might not make sense to have a railway stop there, but if it was more of the transit type where there's a lot of stops within the city, I think that would make a lot of sense. I don't know what the actual use of the rail is though. So I was under the impression it was from city to city.
It's Amtrak and heavy freight.
Okay, so there's sort of, yeah.
What I'll just point something out is Bowen was one of the few that kept First Street. Can you point out where First Street is?
This one.
He kept First Street, and it was an option whether to keep it or not.
I mean, streets have an important role in creating places, so there's traffic measures that we can put in place for people who are driving 80 miles an hour down there, and it can help.
So studio assignments get put together for lots of reasons. Most of those reasons are training, things to get you a first job. Some of them are for education, things to help you replace the people who hired you in the first place. They're not necessarily design competitions. Okay, but let's say this was. Why is your scheme better than everything else we've seen today? You provided a solution
Yeah.
But you have not convinced me why you think this isn't the best solution. And I'd like to hear that.
The best one. I think first, this project create like easy access for people both from both communities. So I kind of like solve the problem created by this railway road, I think. Yes, for example, the people from the Barbe's community, they can directly go to the upper level entrance. And for the South Broadway communities, people can just directly enter the entrance.
Say that again, but say it like you're reading. I think you're very accomplished at space planning.
Yeah.
I think what you put together actually has some features that you didn't tell us about, but Bruce kind of threw you a life raft kind of thing, saying, by the way, there's this really important thing that you did. I think that if we looked at some of the other students we've seen today, we would talk about success, civicness, placemakingness in different kinds of ways. So Ingrid's saying, no, it's about farming. Stupid stadium, farming. And yeah, I got to deal with it, but this is a big important thing for the people, right? Or it could be like the last scheme we saw, which no, actually, there's this thing called geometry that designers are really good at manipulating. And I've got an idea, and I'm going to use geometry to achieve some other kinds of goals. Your presentation, as accomplished as the technical details are, is quite frankly flat. And if you go in with that kind of approach, you won't get to the second round of interviews. And you actually, I think you genuinely underserve your profession and underserve yourself. Right? We're here as professionals. It doesn't matter what we do. It matters what we do for others. And that has to be upfront, big, loud, proud in everything you present.
Thank you.
I think that's fair. You know, when I look at this, it seems very rational. We could debate whether this is in the right place or could shift over to that. But just looking at it, it feels like you've kind of really thought through where the different elements, you know, should be and how they relate to one another and things like that. But there isn't that spark of like, what is the story behind this, or what is the big idea? What is the emotional connection between what you've done and the community or the, you know, culture of Albuquerque? And so I think, to echo the comment we just heard, it undersells all the good thinking that you've done by missing sort of that emotional part of the sales pitch.
But I mean, you've done some really bold moves. I mean, you covered the entire, I mean, you did a covered walkway over the entire railroad. That's actually pretty awesome and a really smart way to have, if you have freight coming through there all the time and that's not going to stop, if you still want to feel connected. I think the berming and the big land move, I mean, that's pretty wild. The whole part coming up over the railway into the stadium, and those are really bold moves. So I do appreciate that, and I also do appreciate that you really thought about like, okay, how do we first connect to downtown? Okay, then let's make that the first connection. Or you know, I think like they said, there's a lot of rational connections here, but there's also a lot of bold. I mean, that's pretty big. We're gonna platform over the entire railway. We're gonna make a huge berm. So I think selling that a little bit more, if it's in a perspective. I mean, I think you tell the story. You do tell the story, but I think I don't know. You could be a little bolder in saying I'm being bold here. I'm, you know, man, I think you have to do something like that if you're going to have freight rail coming through the middle of your site all the time.
Yeah, to echo that, that kind of went over my head. That approach to the railroad. And so I think that being more bold with that big bold idea is spot on, because it didn't resonate with me how monumental that choice was, and it is pretty interesting. So
This is Reed. I think it's a pretty strong scheme, but I would say that what we have here is essentially a diagram with a little bit of enhancement for the park area in the middle and some of the other areas. I think it's a very strong basis. It'd be great to see you develop this sort of one more iteration to develop it into something so that we get more of a sense of the three-dimensional space of the park and the buildings and so on. I think it's a good scheme. I've been kind of harping on the numbers and how big is the stadium and the parking and so on and so on. And of course, I'd love to have that information. And but it's still strong. And I think that if you did the scheme one more time to develop it, you would also at the same time maybe be able to tease out or find the narrative that would make it fit to the community, and that some other people found earlier, but then they got that, but then they lost that on some other parts of the design, which I think you've captured. So maybe your approach and somebody else's approach would be a good marriage for the two. I'd like to have more information about all of it.
I think there are some real successes with the scale and some very believable connections with how you tied into the surrounding neighborhood, and even just starting with showing the neighborhood allowed you to work that way. And I think one of the big things I see that might have added to your story is just a bit more about the ecology and stormwater quality. I see a bit there, but there's a lot of connections that aren't as apparent, whereas some things like the circulation network are very strong. How the other things weave into the site might allow another iteration that would connect it more to the place and make it give you more of a story to tell.
Yes, I agree.
I think one thing to note is when you're presenting to your peers, like designers, we can read a diagram pretty quickly. That's easy for us. And there's been comments here about what's the story of the place, right? How do you sell this? I think when you're presenting to clients or communities, the best way to get to that emotion is to present from the user's point of view. And so you can even list out your users. We have the neighborhood with kids who's walking onto site. We have the game day massive soccer fan who's coming by train. We have the people who've been in the market shopping for the day, but they want to go explore the park. People coming by car, bike, etc. So if you get down into that headspace and then you write out what their experience would be arriving and then using the space, and then when we present that way from that perspective, it brings that emotion and what you want users to feel. But it's a little bit harder, right? Because it's easy just to speak to what we know best, which is diagrams and uses and needs, circulation lines and that, but I think that's how you get down to the emotion of it.
After a number of years of teaching a course similar to this, I never found until this semester the book. They're all, like one chapter is good, the others are not so relevant. It's simply called Urban Design, and it goes through step by step and why and everything. And not that the others, and they were given reading assignments, and not that the others didn't read it, but I could see that Bowen read it and applied what he learned. What I'm supposed to be quiet, but it's hard for me to do that. Go back to your first slide, Bowen. Very first slide. Yeah, this one. This one. Maybe what Rob and perhaps what I heard from others is, a lack of maybe a narrative or spice, passion is in here. Is the things that you identified as important within the context, the culture of, I mean, this stadium is being dropped in the middle of a very old culture that dates back to the I think to the 1600s. You've identified that there in a very, I think in a way that could have somehow been included within your plan in some way. How exactly, I don't know, but I think you have the ingredients to give more of a flavor of what the spaces are like and what, you know, it's not just blocks of concrete buildings, but it's the spaces in between. And as a landscape architect, or as landscape architects, we're really interested in the spaces in between and what the experience is. And I think you have, you know, good spaces in terms of required square footage, but it lacks what I think you could have done somehow used from this, I think a very good diagram. You know, we ask you as faculty to do things, and there's a reason. It's not just busy work to get us through the semester. Do you understand? Yeah. So I'm done.
A lot of things he asked me to do too, we're gonna look for in portfolios. So they are asked of you for a reason, because it's how you can best tell the story. And so when you're putting this in your portfolio, and you submit it to a firm, they're gonna look pretty quickly the first round. And they're gonna do a general overview, at least that's what I do. And then I like to dig into projects that catch my eye, but then I need to know that leave behind will tell the story even before I talk to you.
Does anyone else have a comment? We have 3 things to do when we're done with Bowen. Not to do to him, I mean, that we do afterwards.
There was one perspective where you showed some art that clearly was Albuquerque art, and you start to talk about art. I wonder if that would be a hook or a way to kind of have it feel more of the place. I mean, there's lots of good thinking here, but you just want it to really feel like it's, you know, in Albuquerque.
Okay.
Thank you.
So. All right, so I think there are 3 things not that you have to do. I'm going to ask our guests to do number 1 on my agenda for the rest of the afternoon is 1, maybe you could, the 3 or 4 of you could get your chairs or turn around and face the students. I'll do it. I'll show you what I do. And this is a picture of aerobics. Okay. Our guests who are in remotely, you might turn your chairs around. No, keep them where they are. And ask you maybe some parting overall general comments. You know, I don't know. I don't want to tell you what to talk about, but maybe there's some general comments of successes and you know, things that you learned from the students, what they could do to become better, or some reflections of what you heard today, this afternoon. We'll give you a half hour to think about it. Adam, could you tell them?
Yeah.
I'll just start with some, I'll repeat a little bit what I said earlier. I think throughout your career, you're going to have endless amounts of data during your analysis phase. Remember when we talked about site analysis when I first met with you guys? So in that phase, you're going to have endless amounts of data that you can find and that things that you can analyze. But it's important that you think about what can you analyze if you only have an hour? What can you analyze if you have a day or 2 weeks? Meaning attack everything in layers of time so that you don't get analysis paralysis in too deep. And then most importantly is summarize what your takeaways are from your analysis, like in 5 bullet points that are going to affect your design decisions as you move into the next phase. And then when you get into that conceptual phase that we looked at the midterm, again, think about your big moves, try to stay big picture, look at systems. But what are your 5 main design principles at that point? You're constantly zooming in, zoom out, you're checking yourself, what's your design process and how are you pulling out, highlighting the main points of it, of your thought process. I don't think I'm making the best sense right now, but you need to constantly look at the big picture and check yourself. And then when you get into the articulation of the space itself, constantly checking back to those main takeaways from discovery and main design principles that you set in your early conceptual process, so that there's a cohesiveness to your story. That's going to help you lay out your presentation, and also it's going to help you attack the actual graphic production, because we have to think about it in layers. Like whenever I do a master plan, I start with the bones. So if the client calls, oh, change it, you actually have to present to us today at 3. And at least I have the functional bones in place that I can speak to the big idea from. And then if you still have 2 more days or a week, then you can start articulating more and more and more. But it's best to try not to get caught into like the weeds too soon, if that helps. But as soon as practical advice on how to attack these types of things.
One thing that I would say is look at the entire presentation as a whole before you sort of get into, what the production, or what the sort of items that you're going to be producing for the entire project are. Storyboard it all out, figure out what those pieces, and then, sort of, create that InDesign document and start to fill in with all the products. And I mean, there's a couple of them that looked like, really well thought out as a cohesive project, comprehensive project. And I'll just encourage you to sort of, think about the entire thing, how to break it out into pieces. If you don't get to all of it, that's fine, but at least you have the structure to where, you end up with extra time. But you can, you can sort of fill those gaps in.
That's going to help you with your time management too. So if you lay out the storyboard and you have 1 week to complete this, you can actually just designate time for each thing. And then you can also prioritize, like out of all those pieces of your story, what's going to matter the most. And that's what maybe you provide more time with. Or once you're a leader, you provide more team members on, it's going to help you with so much that one thing right there that he's talking about.
If you look at it as a whole and you start to fill in those pieces, you'll never end up with things like missing labels and missing scale and whatever, because you'll be building all of that and then inserting the content behind it. Thinking about design, but yeah, I mean, also think about the way you present. So this was, very large screen, but there were still times where we felt like we needed to zoom in, and that could have been avoided by having like 1 page be 1 plan, and then a set of diagrams, and then a set. So instead of having boards where it's like an entire narrative on 1 board, you can break it up and have each individual slides be individual drawings. So it's because you always run into those technical issues. Well, I don't know how to zoom, I don't know how to do stuff like that. So.
And if you do the storyboard or something like that, you might, and this is permissible, make some cards, note cards, and when you're up there talking, you have the note cards, so you don't get nervous about, am I going to forget the important things?
Yeah, I've never
planned to do. Put it in those 3x5 cards. No one's going to say, "Oh, look at she's got cards in her hand." No, that's showing that you're serious about this.
We talked about it a little bit earlier on, but when you live in that plan, your site plan, you're living it for so long. When you go to present after all those days or months working on it, you might start to do this. Oh yeah, this over here, and then over here I have this, and then I thought about this. Oh yeah, there's this. And your audience is going to get a little seasick, plus they're not going to get the passion behind it. Or as you were talking about, what's the big story you're selling. So again, you can get down to that user experience by, or anything, if anything, start from left to right, but I think it's even more fun and emotional if you start from like the user and get a little cheesy with if you want, like, you know, Sarah and her dog Ralph are headed to the stadium. This is not game day. Are they gonna find anything that excites them or keeps them there? And then you walk them through that. So they just be, I don't know how you present your site. You worked hard on it. Try to piecemeal or thing.
I think, one, you should thank Bruce for the size of this project. So this is about, I'm gonna say it's 2/3 the size of a ULI competition, which is actually a really useful thing to have in your portfolios. Which also means you should take whatever comments you got from today and fix them. So you're actually ready for your portfolio. It's the size of project that will be scrutinized in many of the kinds of firms that our students typically apply for. So don't waste that. Then also the next part of that means, okay, so you got one of these sort of like juicy nugget size things for your portfolio. You get one more studio. So start thinking about the kinds of things you want to learn, not the place you want to study, but the kinds of things you think you need to also add for your portfolio. And then sort of we'll call it first 5 years of professional development. So some of the things I didn't see here, I didn't see a compelling process diagram. Like Kara's arrowy things, yeah, okay, it's a metaphor diagram. I want to know how something works, like the Van Valkenburg weak wall kind of thing. Like you need that. There's also, for some of you, not for all of you, we didn't get a chance to talk about the best phrase I've ever heard out of Balcones, plant stuffing. They love stuffing plants, right? Which is a thing that's in some kinds of projects benefit from. Right? But this project, maybe some of those things could have been plant stuffing opportunities. And some of you won't care about plant stuffing. But think about those kinds of things that one might do as a landscape architect to get there. There's this way of it separate from the process diagrams. I think also, and this came up from the more, I think from the presentations today, than necessarily your studio as a whole. So I'm reading this as a symptom, not an underlying cause. But I actually didn't hear much about people. Like I didn't hear about social engagement. Now, your studio is not a social engagement thing and all those kind of things, but how would one actually think about people, both demographics, population, but then also the project for public space stuff of how does one actually use a public park or a plaza? I think had we seen more of the 1 inch equals 20 foot drawings that Bruce had commanded you to do, which you bravely ignored, we probably would have gotten to more of those conversations, but we didn't see that. And for some of you, plant stuffing might not be the thing you want to gravitate to, but it might be the how does someone actually use a park bench or a set of park benches. And that's another kind of topic that wasn't this semester. You get one more choice. So start prioritizing those things before you get to lottery.
Gosh.
You could just say you were overwhelmed and you don't know what to say.
Yeah. You know what, just have a lot of fun. Grad school is a time when you get to totally think of crazy ideas that you're never gonna get to build in the real world. So like, have fun, work with each other. I think the thing about these studios, when I think about it, I mean, I had to design that Philadelphia Baby Arts by myself in grad school. You're never gonna have to do this by yourself in the real world, never. And I think in some ways it kind of sets you up for frustration because you're asked to, I mean, that's not how it works. You have a civil, you have an architect, you have a team, you have an ecologist, you have so many things, but use each other that way. And the studio, I mean, the best thing I got out of grad school are definitely my friends. I mean, obviously I've learned a ton, but you know, use each other as sounding boards, work with each other, and just try to have fun. Because I don't know, it's pretty cool in grad school. You just go, what am I going to design today? You know, I know that wasn't practical, but That's all I got.
I would add, I
I'm
was going
sorry.
to add on to that list of the specialists that you'll have. You will also have a client, and you'll have a client with a lot of opinions and a lot of numbers and dollars and time and all those other requirements that'll be part of it as well.
I'm sorry, Claire or Lydia?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think this is a really interesting site. The scale of it is really exciting to engage with. It's true, you would collaborate, and I think in many ways that, you know, it's important for you to wrap your head around what that means, and that'll make you just appreciate what your colleagues contribute to it as you get into these big sites. I would just also encourage you, you know, I think the comment to have fun was apt, because I did notice, you know, when receiving feedback, you know, comments about not having enough time or not being good at something, but, you know, you're not finished with your graduate program yet. I don't think it's early enough for you to claim that about yourself, or it's too soon for you to claim that about yourself. So I would encourage you to keep learning. If there's things that you're interested in, not just in your program, but as a professional, there's constant symposia and lectures and ways to learn things that you want to be better at. So I would encourage you to keep doing that, and to just do away with it. If someone has an idea for you, say that's great, but you don't need to acknowledge the time constraint at this point in the presentation. You can just move on from that and understand that that's part of your learning process. Is these drawings would have been helpful for me to learn. If I want to use them again, this is how I'm going to prioritize it, and move on for there. But I hope that you enjoy these projects. They're certainly very interesting, and will set you up for a good final semester. So good luck.
So I'll make a couple of other comments. Yeah, I think it's been a great project. It has a lot of complexity and a lot of potential. And I think we saw that in the wide range of solutions and the wide range of problems that people confronted. Those are all really educational. And one of the things that I think you get from projects like this is you get an education. And what I mean by that is you are made aware of situations, circumstances, types of projects, etc. So as you experience the world, your sensibilities about it are heightened. You have more sensitivity to what the problems may be, understanding how other people have solved these problems in different ways, what they did that was successful, what they did that was unsuccessful. So I would encourage you to just go out in the world, look at projects, look at cities, whatever, and look at what you think works really well. What do you love? What gets you excited? And what doesn't work as well? So those are all lessons that you learn and that you can take into your own project work as you go forward in your career. Good lessons here. Lots of things to think about.
I would just like to say how much I appreciate the effort and the attention that everyone paid when they were here, and it's reflective in your work. And the task ahead of you, what was monumental, I think, is what we're getting at. To come to a different culture and climate than you're used to study it in a week, to take those lessons back, to tackle an enormous site like this, to struggle with what do I do with all this leftover space, or how do I make this work, and the technical things about access and parking and all those things. I mean, it was a huge undertaking. And I think it was very successful. And even of those few of you who missed the mark a little bit, wasn't for a lack of effort, wasn't for a lack of paying attention to what was important to us here in Albuquerque. And I'm really impressed with the effort that everybody made. And I think you should be proud of yourselves. I guess I'll just leave it at that. I appreciate it. So thank you.
We thank you, Rob, for bringing us the project.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm last. Two things. One, I like the way that you used your graphics. So many times in studios, like for instance, students will spend hours drawing sections or perspectives. They explain things on the plan and they're done, and they didn't use those other graphics to help explain your idea. And I think every one of you used everything that you drew and thought about to communicate your ideas. And I just want to make a comment because I've seen it so much in the past being before this class, where people do all that work and they don't talk about half of the things that why did you draw it then? Okay, so if you're going to draw something, and I know, I guess on the computer, you don't say you draw, you still draw. Whatever you do with the computer, but you know what I mean, is you do it with a purpose to communicate your ideas. So and then lastly, I just want to say, I'm very proud of the work that you did. I'm very proud of all of you. And each of you kind of picked your challenges and, you know, developed them as best you could in the time that you had. And I think there's just a great success. And I thank the university, the great state of Texas for inviting me. I have no idea why did they pick on me? But I'm glad that I came here. I got to meet Adam, who's been a terrific colleague. And he says, oh, no, what you've done has been extremely important. Thank you for your work and what you've done and your cooperation. And I guess I'd like to know what you do after you graduate. Let me know. Send me a note, where you are. Maybe you'll end up in Berkeley and walk across the street at the Berkeley Bowl and get who knows what. Or Albuquerque. If you didn't get enough tacos and burritos, well, there's more to Albuquerque than those. I don't even think we had those. But anyhow, I'm done. So I thank our guests. You can go take a nap now. For those of you who've been on Zoom for a few hours, go take a nap. Don't be embarrassed. I do it all the time. It's a good excuse to take a nap. And I'd like to thank our guests. Okay, so I have a question of the students. We're going to go out to dinner tonight. It's been my tradition to invite students out to dinner at my house.